I'm Rachel Nussbaum from the Corporate Services team at OTC Markets. I'm here today with Michael Sonnenschein of Grayscale Investments, sponsor of the Bitcoin Trust. Having joined in 2015, the Trust shares were the first publicly quoted securities that enable investors to gain exposure to the price movement of Bitcoin on our OTCQX best market under ticker GBTC. Welcome, Michael. We're very happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So to kick off, can you explain to me the difference between the Bitcoin Trust and Bitcoin?
Absolutely. So the Bitcoin Investment Trust was originally structured in September of 2013. The idea was that investors wanted exposure to Bitcoin as an investment, but there were frictions with where to buy Bitcoin, what price to pay, how to store it safely, etc. And our team decided to look at existing investment products, things like the Spider Gold ETF and other instruments that people could purchase that would give them exposure to an underlying asset. We decided to mimic that structure and created the Bitcoin Investment Trust as a Delaware grantor trust, whereby accredited investors could buy restricted shares of the fund directly from us at the daily struck net asset value. About 2 years later, the Bitcoin Investment Trust was approved through a Form 211 process to move into the OTC market. And so anybody that bought shares from us through our private placement was then eligible to resell them into the public market under the symbol GBTC. And so GBTC is really the secondary market for Bitcoin Investment Trust shares and really allows anybody with a brokerage account, be them a retail investor or an institutional investor, to gain exposure to Bitcoin through the purchase of a security.
And to what do you attribute the latest public interest and investor sentiment for Bitcoin, and how has this changed the narrative?
I would say that about 4 years ago, interest in Bitcoin was rather limited. The only people that were interested in making investments in the space were Silicon Valley CEOs and tech entrepreneurs and a handful of family offices. I'd say about 2.5 years ago, we started to see a lot more interest from high net worth individuals, and we were just starting to see the beginnings of institutional money move into the space. But about 18 months ago, that narrative changed, and I think what investors are most excited about now is thinking about Bitcoin as a digital store of value or a gold 2.0. People look at Bitcoin as perhaps a superior form of gold in the sense that it has a lot of the same attributes, but it is more portable and more divisible and has a lot more utility than gold does. And so I think investor interest and sentiment recently has largely been driven by that, but also seeing that what hasn't killed this asset has actually kind of made it stronger over the last few years. And so what you'll continue to see is investors putting more money into the space and also diversifying beyond Bitcoin into other assets as well.
And on that note, who is investing and what are some of the challenges in educating investors about this asset class?
So I'll take the second part of your question first. I think there's still significant challenges with educating investors. Bitcoin and the digital currency asset class as a whole is a completely new concept, and it's not one that's easy to grasp right off the bat. Investors have no shortage of resources available both on our website, grayscale.co, as well as throughout the internet of people who have written and put together presentations around Bitcoin 101 and 201, et cetera. But nonetheless, this is not another cash flowing equity. This is not a bond. This is not a precious metal. This is a completely new asset class. And so there is a leap that people need to take on the educational front. I think that as investors continue to read up more on this, the asset class becomes something more familiar. And so the types of investors entering to the market today are, I would say, pretty varied. You certainly have retail investors coming in through the purchase of things like GBTC, or even going on websites where they can buy Bitcoin or other digital assets directly. Outside of the US and outside of the Western world, in developed nations, you're seeing a tremendous amount of interest in digital currency because individuals don't want to own their fiat currency in the countries they live in. They have been failed by their governments with respect to their purchasing power, they are experiencing hyperinflation, or maybe they're just completely outside of the financial services sector where they in fact don't have any access to store money or pass money to the next generation, et cetera. And so something like Bitcoin represents the ability to return that power over money back to them as individuals.
And back in 2015, when GBTC went public, they did so through a slow PO onto OTCQX. Can you talk about this process in terms of Ethereum Classic and perhaps other cryptocurrencies being introduced to the public market? And furthermore, how does this asset class on OTCQX complement Grayscale's overall strategy?
Absolutely. So we began working with the OTC Markets team and an introducing broker-dealer the end of 2014 to move the Bitcoin Investment Trust into the public market. We did so through a Form 211 process with FINRA, and the fund began trading on OTCQX in May of 2015. Earlier this year, in fact, at the end of April 2017, Grayscale introduced its second product, which is the Ethereum Classic Investment Trust. That product is an identical structure to the Bitcoin Investment Trust, but obviously holds Ethereum Classic, a different digital token, instead of Bitcoin. And so statutorily, our investors are held to owning their shares for at least 1 year before they can be resold under Rule 144. And so we recently announced that we've kicked off the process to do the same thing, file a Form 211 for the Ethereum Classic product, working with OTC Markets and an introducing broker to move that vehicle onto OTCQX as well. And if we're successful in this initiative, we would anticipate seeing that vehicle on OTCQX sometime next summer.
Thank you, Michael, so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to learn about Bitcoin and all the wonderful things that Grayscale has in store, and we look forward to seeing more of your securities on OTCQX in the future.
Thank you for having me.